Hey guys, I almost finished this video before I was aware of the personal things going on in Mr. Blampied's life. I just want to reiterate that this wasn't made with the intention to kick him while he's down. I'm not going to be focusing on anything personal about allegations against him. It's purely on the creative aspects of a video he posted 8 years ago. There are two sides to every story, so I won't be engaging in any witch hunt, and if that's what you're looking for, this video isn't for you. Hi everyone. Welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to do a critique of Adam Blampied's video, how the WWE should have booked the invasion. I want to reiterate that there are things I liked about this video, but I'm mainly going to be focusing on the things I didn't like. That's not to say it's bad, but I personally think it's overrated and believe there are better, albeit less popular fantasy booking angles on YouTube. As you may be aware, I did my own rebooking of the WCW versus WWF invasion angle, so check it out in the description if you haven't already. First of all, I have to give credit where it's due. I wouldn't have started making my own wrestling videos if I wasn't inspired by Adam Blampied, mainly for his work on the What Culture Wrestling channel, which is where this was posted. Not that they need it, but I'm also going to give a shout out to Brian from Wrestling with Regret and the Wrestling Bios channel. They've all produced great content, which inspired me immensely. Clearly, when it comes to production standards, I don't have a studio or editing team. I'm a one-man band with a full-time job outside of YouTube and a PC with a microphone. So in that respect only, I'd put Adam's video ahead of my own rebooking of the angle. However, I do feel my storyline was better, made more sense, and would have been a lot more cost effective for the company. Of course, some of these points are subjective, and if you haven't already, I'd invite you to watch my own rebooking of the WCW versus WWF invasion angle and make your own minds up. I also want to reiterate that I don't think Adam's rebooking of the invasion storyline was bad by any means, but the point of this video is to highlight its inadequacies, which I don't think any other YouTuber has done. Anyway, let's get into it. This is my critique of Adam's rebooking of the WCW versus WWF invasion storyline.
Hello, I'm Adam from WhatCulture.com and welcome to how WWE should have booked, where I look back at infamous WWE misbooking opportunities and talk about how I would book them differently because I'm a smart ass. So if I fail at this, there's no coming back. There's no coming back for me. Sam will just take me outside and put 2 in the back of my head and replace me with Pacitti. And some of you think you want that, but you don't.
You really think the invasion wasn't that bad? It was literally the worst thing ever.
I know I said I'd be mainly focusing on the negatives, but I just want to say that Wrestling with Regret being featured here was awesome. I love that channel and Brian's really cool, so check him out if you've not already subscribed.
It turns out that all of the big players had contracts with Time Warner, you know, fat contracts that basically was paying them a lot of money to do precisely nothing. So they were happy to wait at home while this whole mess regurgitated itself on TV. It cost way too much money to bring in all the top players at once. So, to be honest, rebooking the invasion's easy. All you have to do is wait a year. Easy peasy, done dusted.
Wait, cool your jets, Turbo.
Hello again, Brian.
Look, I have one rule with this fantasy booking of yours. You have to have everything wrapped up by WrestleMania 18. You can't wait till the big stars' contracts run out. You have to work with what you've got.
I don't know why you've set yourself a rule where you can't simply wait until the contracts run out. It makes the most sense on every conceivable level. That's not against Brian, by the way. I'm sure he was told to say that by either Adam or the What Culture channel.
You have to work with what you've got.
He says you have to work with what you've got, but in the angle he's booked, he hasn't done this at all. He set himself a rule where he had to finish his angle at WrestleMania X8, which was 4 months after the actual invasion finished, with the start time of his invasion also coming 3 months later. So he has delayed the angle to his advantage, but miraculously didn't use this advantage to sign any WCW talent whose contracts had run out in that time.
All right, here we go. You ready, Sam?
Yep, I'm ready, Adam.
No ECW. Sorry guys. Now, I mean, RVD and Rhino, you guys can debut after WrestleMania X7.
Rhino had already signed with the WWE before the invasion started. He'd even signed before WrestleMania X7. There were only 2 ECW wrestlers signed for the invasion angle, and that was Tommy Dreamer and Rob Van Dam. This is just a small thing, but the timeline's a bit off there.
Secondly, I know a lot of the big players are out with big, fat contracts, but here's the thing. You can buy those contracts. You can buy them out. You can offer them enough money that they will come to work straight away. Now,
although this is technically true, you also have to be realistic. Not only would the WWE have to at least match what these wrestlers were getting paid to do nothing, but you'd have to pay crazy money on top of that to persuade them to come back to work early. Considering what Goldberg, for example, was earning in WCW, which would have been an extra $3.5 million a year on top of his $8.5 million AOL contract buyout, it means you're basically paying $12 million just to have one wrestler come in early, which is just not economically viable. Goldberg and Kevin Nash have even come out themselves and said they wanted a break from wrestling after WCW's closure, which is completely understandable. I did include them in my angle, but I deliberately debuted them shortly before they agreed contract buyouts in real life. I was also advocating for a relaunch of WCW as its own entity after the invasion finished, with Vince McMahon potentially getting double pay-per-view money, so my less costly investment would have also been worth the risk.
We could take WCW and perhaps turn it into this huge media conglomerate, much like World Wrestling Federation Entertainment is today. We know how to do that.
That is a financial gamble, yes, and you can't do it with everyone, but you will have to do it with some people just off the off. And here's what I'm saying: Hogan, Hall, and Nash. Those guys. Buy those contracts after WrestleMania, get them ready to come in at SummerSlam. It will probably be a stupid amount of money, absolutely, but you need the NWO. They represent WCW at its most WWF ass-kicking point.
According to sources, Hogan underwent knee surgery shortly after his WCW departure and wasn't ready to wrestle again until November. Scott Hall didn't want to work the hours the WWE required without his friends, and Kevin Nash's AOL contract expired on January the 1st, 2002, having made it clear that he wanted a break from wrestling. So it's unlikely for a number of reasons that they would have come in Adam's timeline.
So you need those guys front and center at any invasion. If you want to save money, you can just bench or release a lot of the lower mid-carders. I mean, it's brutal, but you can just bring those guys back into the fold over the next few years anyway, and you don't need to clog up the system with, Chronic.
To be fair, Chronic only had 2 matches in the WWE and left straight afterwards with 0 payout, so I'm not sure if that was a great example of saving money, but I think what he means is not signing most of these WCW mid-carders, which I don't disagree with.
Vince lines up a whole bunch of ex-WCW guys in the ring. You got Chris Jericho, Chris Benoit, Eddie Guerrero, Perry Saturn, Dean Malenko.
In real life, Chris Benoit was out injured and didn't feature for the WWE after the King of the Ring pay-per-view until July 2002. Eddie had also been fired by the WWE before this date, so again the timeline's a bit off.
In the end, a match is agreed to. Triple H, who's really starting to get annoyed at being in the middle of all of this, versus Eddie Guerrero. If Eddie wins, the WCW stars can come back. If not, they are all fired for good.
In real life, Triple H was out injured before this pay-per-view and didn't come back until January 2001, again in a match which didn't happen in Adam's timeline. But was it a freak accident or something which had been building up? I don't know, but it's becoming quite messy territory now. I'll give him the benefit of the argument and assume Triple H would have been available had he not had that match in Adam's timeline.
Men down. They beat up the announcers, they beat up the timekeeper, they beat up the referee, they tear the announce table apart. They spray WCW in the middle of the ring. And finally,
the NWO spraying WCW isn't likely to happen. Their entire existence up to this point had been to destroy that company, but maybe I'm being pedantic there.
He explains, Shane McMahon, his own flesh and blood, sold his share of WWF and of WCW to Eric Bischoff.
I think it's unlikely that Shane would buy WCW just to sell it to Eric Bischoff. To me, that makes no sense whatsoever. I understand why you'd want Eric Bischoff to lead the charge against the WWE, but you could do that by simply making him a general manager, like I did in my rebooking of the angle. And it's worth noting that he never owned WCW. He was always just a high-positioned employee for the company.
And Eric Bischoff promises it's not just going to be WCW that kicks Vince's ass, he's going to kick Vince's ass. Well, not him specifically, but he challenges Vince McMahon to a street fight. Vince McMahon accepts, saying, "I can't wait to paste your ass all around this ring." And Eric Bischoff says, "Oh no, it's not me you'll be fighting. It's sort of Mr. WCW." Woo! Out comes Ric Flair, because around Survivor Series time, his contract was up and he was ready to come work for the WWF anyway.
Given their history, for me it doesn't make sense for Flair to come in and blindly side with Eric Bischoff and the NWO. We never saw any making up backstage for the past, nor was there any infighting during this angle between him and the NWO, which would have made it make a bit more sense. It all became about the Clique instead.
Comes out, cuts a promo on how WCW was much better than WWF, citing all the old NWA days even, really get that heritage in. Then finally we have Invasion, which looks like this. So,
in his Invasion pay-per-view, he's only featured 4 matches when the average pay-per-view would have about 10. So far in this storyline, only these wrestlers have invaded: Booker T, DDP, Storm, Kidman, the NWO and Flair. So at most your Invasion pay-per-view would have Billy Kidman in a match, and the other half of the pay-per-view would have to be matches where WWF wrestlers are facing each other.
America for the IC title, Booker T and DDP beat the Dudleys for the Tag Team Championships, Ric Flair beats Vince McMahon, and the NWO beat Triple H, Rock and Austin, because Triple H switches sides. Now I know I promised no sloppy betrayals, this is the only one, Scout's Honor. Because it's the only one that makes sense. Why would anyone leave WWF for WCW after WCW just ran itself into the ground? It's the company couldn't survive by itself, so why would they chance their odds on an invading WCW? Instead, the only reason Triple H leaves is because he was being mistreated by Vince, by his family, who never delivered on any of his promises. So Triple H says, next night on Raw, "Do you know why I did what I did? Because the only wrestling family I actually have, the only guys who stuck with me through everything, the only guys who never let me down, it's the Clique." With his best buddies, Kevin Nash and Scott Hall, Triple H officially joins NWO.
You may disagree, but I don't personally like the switch or think it actually makes any sense. Although 2 Clique members are fighting for WCW, the other 2 are signed with the WWE, and while he technically has history as a former WCW wrestler, it was brief, and people associated him with being a WWF wrestler during the Monday Night Wars. I personally had the Big Show as the only person who jumped ship, as he had history as a former member of the NWO, and Team WWE already had a stacked upper card, even without Triple H.
Now I know I promised no sloppy betrayals, this is the only one, Scout's Honor.
A few inches later.
And X-Pac completes the set. He brings the light heavyweight title over to WCW, renames it the Cruiserweight title, and splits off from X Factor.
So much for your Scout's Honor, hey? And what a way to pointlessly not give us a dream DX versus NWO match.
Invasion's just happened, and if it's anything like the frankly much worse Invasion pay-per-view that actually happened, this will rake in serious coin. Okay, the Invasion pay-per-view, the bad version, raked in $10 million just by itself. So if it can get that, then I think we've got a bit more money to throw around and we can maybe buy out one more contract. And that contract's going to be Goldberg. And trust me, yeah, Goldberg is expensive, but he's worth it.
He simply wouldn't have come at this point. He made it clear once WCW was bought out that he wanted a break from wrestling. He's even come out and said he didn't particularly like wrestling. He was reportedly being paid $8.5 million for the next 3 years to stay at home. So even if you were able to match his $3.5 million a year he got in WCW on top of this, which would have been $12 million to bring him in, I seriously doubt he would have accepted it. Goldberg was included included in my angle, but that's because he had already had a year without working, and he negotiated himself an AOL contract buyout just 4 months after I booked him in May 2002. It suggests that he was ready to work at that point and featured for New Japan in April 2002, but it's very unlikely that he would have opted to come back to work this early on in Adam's timeline. Even if he did, I don't think he was worth $12 million when there was already a packed roster and you could have just waited 9 months instead. Anyway, we're going to see how Adam debuts the hottest free agent in wrestling who would have cost more than anyone else in the industry.
Suddenly Triple H turns around and pedigrees Shane McMahon. After all, they've got everything they wanted from the guy, so they punish Vince McMahon's son in front of him. And Vince, because he's slowly turning babyface, is like, get your hands off my child, thanks. So Shane McMahon is left lying in the middle of the ring. Eric makes everyone else leave, makes everyone leave the ring, and then just as Shane McMahon is rising to his feet, he turns around, and guess who slid in the ring? Goldberg. Bam! 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 Goldberg spears Shane McMahon out of his trousers, and he picks him up, jackhammers him, busts him open with rights and lefts. Goldberg just keeps hitting him and hitting him and hitting him until eventually Vince says, all right, you've got your match, just please stop murdering my son. And Eric says, thanks Vince, smug old grin. Final image of the night is Vince cradling his bloodied boy. Babyface turn confirmed. So we've got Survivor Series. That card looks like this.
Again, you've only been able to show 5 matches with such a small pool of WCW talent that the rest of the match card would have to be WWF wrestlers facing each other. Goldberg's buyout alone would have cost more than for all of these wrestlers to have a 1-year deal each.
He grabs Eric and hits him with a tombstone pile driver. Next week, the final show before Starrcade, Eric realizes, he can't beat The Undertaker by himself, so instead, he needs to bring in a similar creature of the night. He brings in Sting. Now, I know we have a lot of problems with Sting, because Sting refused to come to the company because of the way they treated WCW guys. But seeing as this is a less ego-driven angle than the Invasion angle was, hopefully we can coax him over to the WWF. So Sting comes out in eerie darkness, out comes The Undertaker, Sting points the bat at The Undertaker, Undertaker cuts his throat. That's the final image before Starrcade, the card of which looks like this. Goldberg beats The Big Show, Angle beats Flair, The Rock beats Hogan.
Again, to me, bringing Sting in as a heel to side with the NWO and Bischoff just doesn't make sense. I don't think any of the WCW nor the WWF fans wanted to see that. And in his very first match, you have him come in just to lose to The Undertaker. You can have face wrestlers representing WCW. What Adam's done here is fallen into the trap of making all WCW wrestlers automatic heels, which in my opinion is just lazy writing. And it's very much a WWF Mark's perspective, where the only talent he's brought over were wrestlers who happened to sign with the WWE after WCW's closure. For me, it's not really thinking outside of the box, or realising there was great WCW talent Vince didn't re-sign.
And the dirtiest player in the game, Ric Flair, challenges the most electrifying man in sports entertainment, The Rock, to see who can be the most charismatic man in the history of professional wrestling. Sold out. The card looks like this. Sting beats Kurt Angle, Triple H beats The Undertaker, Ric Flair beats The Rock.
I'm a WCW mark, but Ric Flair beating The Rock? No, just no. The Rock was the second biggest star in the industry at this point, behind Stone Cold, and Flair just didn't need that victory. You've also repeated the same match a number of times, with DDP and Booker T against either the Hardys or the Dudleys.
A brawl, and the card looks like this. So the War Games match ends with Team WWF finally victorious. They finally win
Again, Booker T and DDP versus the Dudley Boys. I had Booker T and DDP team up on occasions too, but did you forget that the APA existed, or that Booker T was WCW champion, so could have also had some 1v1 matches too?
A war needs War Games. So we got the 4-man team of Team WWF, The Rock, Austin, The Undertaker and Kurt Angle versus a team of Hogan's choosing, and because of all this infighting, Hogan doesn't pick Scott Hall and Kevin Nash. Instead, the team is Hulk Hogan, Triple H, Booker T and DDP. That all goes down not at No Way Out, but at Super Brawl, and the card looks like this. So the War Games match ends with Team WWF finally victorious. They finally win a...
And he also made a big mistake here. He said the main event would have Booker T and DDP in Team WCW, yet also features them earlier in the card in a losing attempt against the Dudleys. It makes no sense, really.
So finally, we have WrestleMania, and the card looks like this. Booker T and DDP beat the Dudleys in a 2 out of 3 falls match.
Oh look, Booker T and DDP versus the Dudley Boys again. This is just lazy, man, come on. Also Goldberg losing to The Undertaker. You've paid $12 million for someone who's so far featured in tag matches and has beaten Edge and Rob Van Dam, who at this point were upper mid-carders. I think given the choice, most people wanted to see Sting face The Undertaker at WrestleMania X8, which is the match I booked in my angle. But you guys can be the judge. This was my WrestleMania X8 match card compared to Adam's. You can tell me on paper which you think is better. Being pedantic again, Shawn Michaels wasn't wrestling again until 7 months later. So was he ready to have a no-holds-bar match with Triple H at WrestleMania 18? All the research I've done suggests no. So again, not a lot of thought was put into this timeline. Shawn Michaels simply wasn't ready to have a full match at this point.
And what about you guys at home? Did I book it better, or did I just bring in established names to help artificially raise the stakes and sugarcoat weak booking? Wink.
Look, in all seriousness, this wasn't bad, and I really enjoyed it when it came out 8 years ago. I know, having made my own rebooking of the angle, how tough it is, and I especially like the Vince versus Bischoff confrontation idea, which I didn't want to shamelessly rip off when I booked my own version. However, in hindsight, there were a number of problems which I'm going to list in a nutshell here. Number 1, the timeline is off, with injuries or featuring wrestlers who weren't with the company. Number 2, there was too much dependency on wrestlers accepting an early buyout of their AOL contracts when they've publicly come out and said they didn't want to come back to work early. Number 3, even if they did agree to come back early, the budgets for these buyouts were completely unreasonable. Number 4, not enough WCW talent was hired to fill a pay-per-view. Number 5, not showing all the pay-per-view matches. Number 6, repeated a lot of the same pay-per-view matches. I think people would have got fed up with Booker T and DDP versus the Dudley Boys 4 times in a row. Number 7, no female wrestlers were involved in this angle, which would have massively demeaned that division. You could have signed Medusa, who had history as a WWF Women's Champion, or signed Jazz as an invader to come and assist WCW. At worst, having the stuff we saw with Tori Wilson and Stacey Kimbler in the actual invasion would have been better than having no female representation at all. Number 8, results of the few matches you did show didn't always make sense. For example, bring Sting in just to lose on his debut, or having Flair go over The Rock at that point in their careers just didn't make sense. Anyway, please like my video and subscribe to my channel if you enjoyed this content. And if you want to do your own critique of how I booked the angle, I would absolutely welcome it. Until next time, everyone.